The happiness of most people we know is not run by the great catastrophes or fatal errors, but by the repetition of slowly destructive little things. At this point, you may be thinking to yourself, I know everything counts. I would never deliberately decide to be wobbly. Well, for most of us, though, it doesn't happen that way. We don't decide to live unconsciously. We choose one small moment of unconsciousness. We don't decide that we don't care and that things don't count. We choose to make one small thing not count. However small the moments of unconsciousness, small choices, and small decisions, they all add up and create big consequences. There's no such thing as a small thing. In fact, it is the little things in life that are often most deadly. All it takes is one tiny screw that's loose or one wire not correctly connected to cause a plane crash. All it takes is one spark to start a wildfire that can destroy hundreds of homes and millions of dollars of damage. And all it takes is one small particle of bacteria that can cause a deadly plague such as the Black Death, which wiped out one third of the population of Europe 700 years ago. Well, that's history, but 2020 is no mystery to anyone. How the small things we take for granted snowball into such an unexpected and unfathomable, unfortunate catastrophes. All it takes is a driver taking that attention away from the road for 1 second as they check their texts to cause a fatal accident. One moment of consciousness can change your lives and the lives of others forever. Your spiritual obligation to the world is to do everything you can to live with constant consciousness. How do we begin? We need to understand that we don't just suddenly go unconscious. We don't just suddenly feel wobbly. We don't just suddenly decide that things don't count. There is always a sequence of downwardly spiraling moments. We start out in the first moment moving 1 inch off from integrity and 2 inches off, and before we know, we're really off. Have you ever been swimming in the ocean which looked deceptively calm from the shore, but in which there was actually a very calm tide? All of a sudden, you notice that you quickly drifted away from where you entered the water. The same strong undertow that had made you drift so rapidly now makes swimming against it exhausting. So often in life, we don't realize that we're being pulled along by some kind of energetic tide or vibrational undertow. From a person, from a situation, from something we're doing that influences us, or from unconscious, unhealed parts of ourselves. And before we know it, we've drifted. And as you know, when you drift and are trying to get back against the pool of the tide, it's not so easy. Small things make a big difference. When we don't pay attention to where we are or what forces are pulling on us, we can easily drift off course. In our relationships, in our business, in our health, and even our integrity. We've all had this experience, whether it's been drifting off financially, drifting off emotionally, or drifting off spiritually. What does this drifting look like? It's the small equivocation, the minor adjustment in our usual values, the bargaining with ourselves in which we insist, it's not that bad. It's just this once. Except that when we do it again and again, we don't realize that small things, drift things, add up and become a huge drift from which it's difficult to return. When we don't pay attention, we can drift off without knowing it. We ignore small things because we choose unconsciousness over consciousness. Then we suddenly find ourselves somewhere we don't want to be. And maybe somewhere from which we don't know how to return. What is the antidote of all this? Consciousness. There's no substitute for consciousness. There's no substitute for paying attention. There's no substitute for seeing what there is to see. The amount of time we spend in our lives trying to get back from wherever it is we've drifted to, or trying to convince ourselves that and others that we haven't drifted, or cleaning up our emotional messes created by drifting, takes far more than what it would have taken to be and remain conscious in the first place. Think about it. This is Monica, sending you love, light, and consciousness drift.